Some glamorize the spiritual awakening process, implying that it's primarily light and love, expanding highs, unity consciousness, deep peace, ecstatic bliss, and spiritual visions. And one thing's for certain, they probably haven't been through the dark nights of the soul. I call this phase of the awakening process the descent, as very often we find ourselves hurtling into the underworld of our shadows, body, the earth, humanity, our ancestry, and the past. This part of the spiritual awakening journey is where so many of us are right now collectively, and there are not many maps out there to help us navigate it. It's here in the descent that we are invited to deepen and descend into what's been hidden in the shadows, inherited, pushed down, silenced, ignored, bypassed, and not just by ourselves. We can come face to face in the descent with the wounds that are stored deep in the cells of our bodies from our childhood, our ancestry, the collective. And we're called to go deeper than we ever have before as we welcome more and more of our soul and the sacred into our body and onto the planet. And as we do, we can discover the lost parts of us that demand to be held and seen. And those parts ask that we sit with them as they feel in order to heal. For some, the descent can be sparked by astrological transits of midlife, for example, or by an initiation such as a loss, a death, a significant change, a global or cultural event, or even a mystical experience. It can also come on more gradually as the body recovers from the expansive and energetically active stages of the ascent. And the ascent is what I call the first stage of awakening, where it's the awakening of the mind, awakening of the heart, and an awakening of the body. So you have the ascent, and then some of us are called into the descent. The upward expansion of those earlier stages of awakening can create space for spirit to physically drop deeper into matter. And some of us are hurled deeper and deeper underground, right down to the soil and the bones of our bodies, where we begin to process personal, collective, and even intergenerational trauma that until now hasn't been safe enough to feel and face or even understand. This is the long inner winter of the spiritual journey. And it's only through surrendering to its mysterious intelligence that the buds of a brand new spring will return. These are the excruciating holy days of rebirth, of transfiguration, of dying and being reborn while still fully living. If we choose to cross this threshold, we're invited to allow our soul to come more fully into our body and the planet. And this can be painful as we're forced to confront any separation or shadows that we find along the way. We must face the polarity and separation of this human life, and it takes as long as it takes, which is often much longer than we want it to. In the darkness of the descent, we may feel disconnected from the warm light of the divine that we so intimately felt and knew before. We may find that the spiritual practices or teachings and even ways of living that once nourished us and held us so deeply no longer work the way they did before. And this doesn't mean like they were necessarily wrong. It's just we're in a different place now. We're different now. For some of us who are experiencing dark nights of the soul, it can feel as if we're going backward or even losing our mind, for we're feeling and purging and processing and clearing so much more
than what's just our own. Often we may find that we're doing it on behalf of those past, present, and yet to come. It's as if the soul has an appointment, as if it chose this body, this life, this ancestry, and this time. Things really are different now. You're different now. We're different now. The world's different now. We've been flung into the great mystery of life, and the only way out is through. The descent can be made easier if there are ones in your system who are willing to do it alongside you, or sit awake alongside you. If they've been through it themselves, they'll be more equipped to reassuringly hold your head, your heart, your feet. But many souls come into lines and systems that are fast asleep or resistant to change. And if this is you, I just want you to know that I really get it, and that I do believe that if it is part of our path, then our soul has everything that it needs to get through it. And you can call in that support through prayer, through speaking to whatever sacred energies or the divine that you believe in, the goddess, for example. And I do believe that it can feel as though we are, in a way, metaphorically dying. It is metaphorically dying, when in fact we are deep in the long initiatory passage of our own rebirth. It's like the tomb before the womb. The dark nights of the soul really do invite our soul to come more fully into our incarnation, and to search for the sacred that's always been here on earth, all around us, below us, and of course within us. Our soul is hurtling ever deeper into our bodies, our ancestry, the earth, and our humanity. And it's during the descent that our soul and spirit can be woven more fully into the physical in a whole different way than before, stitched deeper, right down to the fascia. Heaven and earth can become one. The sacred and the physical can merge together. We learn that we can experience the divine in the physical, in matter, in our bodies. We can go direct to God through the temple that's always been within every single cell and within our heart as well. Life and death can dance forever together. Spirit can be planted here in the physical. And the soul is the seed for it all to happen. The more deeply our soul descends, the higher it can ascend. Contraction, expansion, the more deeply we incarnate, the more deeply we can be here for others. All separation and pain can come up to be healed in the dark nights of the soul. And I call them dark nights of the soul because it's very rarely one night, that's for sure. It's a passage of life in which it feels as though the connection we once had with the spirit of life has deserted us in a way, as we're left to sit face to face with all that isn't love and light. During the dark nights of the soul, there's really no skirting the surface. This is, after all, the descent into the earth, into our bodies, into our underworld. We may be given unexpected initiations in which we are brought to our knees and question all that we previously so wholeheartedly believed. We're invited to surrender to the great mystery over certainty. And often our humanity is humbled in a way that's really hard to describe or put our finger on. Our heart is stretched, and often we're pummeled into returning to the earth and humanity in a way much deeper than before. In her 1913 book, Mysticism, the English mystical poet Evelyn Underhill wrote about the path of awakening as a mystic's way, where we can set up a direct relationship with the sacred. She recorded the 5 steps of living a mystical life,
And they are: step 1 is awakening, step 2, purification, 3, illuminations, 4, dark night of the soul, and then 5 is union. Who we are when we enter the dark night and who we'll be when we re-emerge are not the same person. The only way through the darkest nights is to sacrifice who we once were to be born anew. It's here that we experience a metaphorical death while right in the middle of our life. The Cloud of Unknowing, which is a 14th century spiritual text that inspired some of the great mystics like St. John of the Cross, described it like this: whatever you do, this darkness and the cloud are between you and your God and hold you back from seeing him clearly by the light of understanding in your reason and from experiencing him in the sweetness of love in your feelings. Now, as a goddess devotee, I would change him to they or her, but you get the general gist. I believe that so many of us have been going through a collective dark night of the soul. And while this part of the spiritual journey has been documented by mystics, sages, and shamans, medicine people, and the saints of old, we really are living in a different time now. It is a time of great change, of urgency, and awakening.
Perhaps what makes the time in which we're living unique is that we are collectively having to learn how to navigate so many complex issues at the same time, from global warming to war, genocide, ecocide, colonialism, capitalism, patriarchy, a deeper understanding of intergenerational trauma, which seems to really be coming up to be healed collectively. Even things like increased life expectancy really has an impact on what we're navigating today. As a society, we try to avoid change and the potent teachers of winter and autumn, or fall if you're from the US, of death and aging. And we've forgotten the great wisdom that these portals impart and thus remain asleep. But if we find a way back to the teachings of nature, we'll likely find the most ancient mystery school waiting for us there. It will show us how life is always trying to initiate us into becoming even more of ourselves. And we'll discover that the darkness is not only the end, but it's also the beginning. And if we embrace it and the great mystery, one day soon we will be rebirthed.
Many mystics speak of a stage after the dark nights of the soul where we experience an intimate merging with the beloved as we return from the underworld completely changed. After what feels like an eternity in the dark, our soul reemerges completely transformed. It's hard to put our finger on it, but we know that no part of us is who we were, and yet somehow we're more ourselves than ever before. The dark nights have taught us how to see in the dark, and that it's actually in the darkness that all of life is reborn. Our worst fears may have been realized, and we've survived it. This gives us a humbled, grounded, unshakable faith and holding that no one can ever take away from us. And while in some ways it feels as though we're back where we were, that we've returned someplace or somewhere, really in reality, nothing could be further from the truth, for we're not the same person. And the only journey that we made was deep within. We discover that the dark nights were actually the womb in which we rebirthed ourselves. There's a deep humbling that the dark nights bring. Once we are brought to our knees, belly to the earth, temple in the heart, we find a home that can never be taken from us. And from this steady soil, we can drop our roots deeper and our hearts wider than before. Rebirth isn't possible without complete surrender to the unknown. We must sacrifice who we were and our understanding of the world in order to be reborn in the middle of our lives. And sacred embodiment isn't possible without the descent. As we descend into our bodies, to each other, humanity, and back to the garden of the earth, we integrate all we've learned at different stages of our spiritual journey. Perhaps the deeper we descend into the physical, the higher we can then soar in the spiritual. Maybe the whole point of the awakening journey is to bring spirit into matter, light into form. Maybe the whole point of the dark nights of the soul is to embody it all. We're living in times between times, rebirthing times, transfiguration times, a collective dark night of the soul. Perhaps what feels like a death could actually be our individual and collective rebirth. So I'd love to hear in the comments, have you ever been through a dark night of the soul? If so, how did it change you? How were you different from who you were before? Maybe you're going through a dark night or dark nights of the soul right now. And if you are, let me know in the comments and let me know, how is it changing you?